Welcome to Hesed Network, where we are a people who partner with Jesus for the creation and multiplication of emotionally healthy disciples in Christian communities. Hesed Firesides are conversations designed to inspire, equip, and encourage you. My name is Chris Caputo. I'm one of the co-founders of Hesed Network. I'm joined today by my best friend and network co-founder, Michael Todd Miller.
Yes. Oh, man, you're bringing the whole
world
thing
knows
in
your
here.
middle name now, Michael T.
Uh-oh. Man, I am excited about this today, though. This
Mike,
is gonna be good.
Your excitement always excites me.
Yes. We had such a good discussion this morning. Not you and I, but with a couple other guys that just confirmed what we were going to talk about today. So
Isn't
it
that
just
crazy?
energized me more.
How the Holy Spirit just kind of knows things
Mhm.
that tie into one another at
Yep.
just the right time strategically. So, Mike, we're talking about healthy extended spiritual families having no place to lay their heads. Wow. Man, I don't know who writes these, but these are always grim titles and questions.
Well, I mean, we're so excited about the things we're seeing happen, but yet I guess what we're doing is acknowledging how much pain there can be in the process.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're wanting to make sure, not to just warn people again, about, but just to be aware of and know that there's going to be obstacles on the way, right?
There absolutely is. And we're kind of wrapping up our series today, aren't we?
That's right.
We've had actually there's 5 weeks in this particular series, so we're going to hopefully end strong today and then move into the next, which I'm excited about. So let me set the table a little bit, Mike. Sometimes healthy spiritual family expressions, what were some of the write-up for this week, I'll quote the message here, has no place to really lay their heads. Think about those in the gospel stories who approached Jesus and they wanted to follow Jesus. And particularly that verse where he says, "Teacher, can I follow you?" And it was a teacher of the law, right? And Jesus responded to him saying, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." And what he was speaking to, yes, Jesus did not have a home on earth where he kind of had this centralized location of just, a homestead. He was always on the move, on the go, living off of the generosity of his disciples and followers, for sure. But also what he was really kind of speaking to, Mike, some were stuck in a mindset where they believe there is much political, financial, or social gain to be had, or maybe an increase of some of those things. We think about that teacher of the law and what Jesus was addressing directly with that particular person. And there could be some other interpretations of that, but what we've discovered is that this teacher who was part of the religious establishment saw this possibly as a means to kind of advance some of his platform. Maybe this Jesus thing plus what I'm doing, man, this sounds amazing. And Jesus like, I don't think you quite understand. Let me tell you how this works. Before you want to come with me, here's what you need to know. It's not going to be comfortable at times. What you know is going to change and get upended in a sense. The wineskin that you're currently in is going to look totally different if you follow me. So it's almost like accounting the cost. Mike, what do you think about some of that?
Well, I love the Passion Translation, how it ends with "no true home in this world." And the reason I like that is, like, he didn't allow himself to get attached to worldly things like we often do.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what you're talking about, whether it's worldly mindsets, whether it's attachments to certain structures or people, or I don't know, like you hit some of that too, but it's just like there's so many things that we attach to in our culture over time and just get comfortable with that and believe that that's the truth of things. And in fact, the kingdom is quite different a lot of times, like you're saying, where we think it's one thing and it turns out it's quite different.
I mean, and let's get a little personal on this, because part of what we mentioned in our discussion before the show was even the disciples, they also had some ideas of this whole Jesus thing and this whole movement and what they were going to receive from the movement, right? Can you sit at my right hand, sit at my left hand? Even I think me too, when I came to the kingdom, I was in so much pain that Jesus was my healer, the face of Jesus, and that he brought such relief. And I have the fire insurance, and I said the prayer, and I'm going to heaven. I'm going to have eternal life. And I just had like this starry-eyed, which is really important. I think there's a season of starry-eyedness. Jesus always seems to be so close to, especially when we first come into the kingdom. It's not like he's a bait and switch God, but really when he takes us deeper down into getting to know him, instead of us seeing God in the image of what we want to make him, we conform to the image of who he is and how he is and the ways that he is. It's not always what even the disciples thought.
Right.
As they started to get to the middle and the back end of this, because the Lord's like, I'm heading towards the cross. And they're like, what are you talking about? I thought we read the scriptures when we were little boys. We didn't get past 13 in rabbinical school, but we know that the Messiah is supposed to come and overturn this whole unjust system and take out the empire and Rome. And aren't you supposed to be this conquering king? And we're going to be at your right and left and having front row waterfront property in your kingdom, son of David? What are you talking about?
That's so good, because that's essentially like they signed up, as in they were all in with him, but he does it different than we expect so often. And I think that's where they were just completely caught off guard by what he was actually doing, because it was so different than what the human mind was believing was really happening. Because our interpretation of the scripture even can I mean, and that's not about the scriptures, but it's almost like a lot of times when someone gets a prophetic word, God a lot of times is bringing it about in a very different way than people expect. It's the same in the scriptures. Like that can surprise us, because we have that little sliver of what we think is actually happening, and usually Jesus is doing something very different, and it's hard for us to register.
Yeah, and even Peter said, "But Lord, we gave all this up for you. We give up everything to follow you."
Right.
It's like, and I get that. I mean, that's just real talk. I don't think Peter's trying to be some hero or whatever, but it's like we're human, we're weak. There's reasons we did it, but there's sometimes Jesus will just get right. He got right in that person's face, the teacher of the law, and he says, "Look, this is a real stronghold for you. I'm not sure you want to follow me at this point, if at all. Because here's how it's going to be." He was very direct, very prophetic and direct. And I'm sure he was probably, Jesus' heart is he loves this person. And at the same time, he met him right where you're at. And he was just like, hey, here's the deal. And I love that about Jesus. There's times where he's tender and there's times he's direct, and you just never know. And then the next person wants to follow him and talks about let the dead bury the dead. I got to go bury my father. I got to go bury my, And so in those times, it's allegiances, the family, right, Mike? It's other systems that sometimes have preeminence in our lives that would supersede a deep surrender to him and the ways of his kingdom. That's another hiccup and a challenge if you want to do this thing, right?
Yeah. Well, and he always seems to turn things upside down. Like you were mentioning John and James and like their mom trying to get them on the right and left of Jesus, right? I mean, it made me think of,
gotta love the Sons of Thunder mama. She's just
right,
like looking out for her boys, and these were his best friends, right? We talk about this in the scriptures, not that he loved them more, but they were the closest to him. But go ahead.
Yeah. But it made me think of the business system, how often, like, climbing the ladder, right? Like a lot of times climbing the ladder is doing everything you can to be seen, to get the promotions and everything. And for Jesus, that was just the opposite, right? Serve others, go low, begin to serve people, and then he'll lift you up, versus what we've been taught in the culture of business. Like that's just one quick example of that.
Yeah. So let's kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this discussion today, because we're wrapping up extended spiritual family, healthy expressions of that. We talked about toxicity that could be within these systems, how to build structures that'll keep the family from collapsing and tearing apart. We went over all these things in the last number of weeks as we walked through the series together. But, to really kind of put a bow on all this, Mike, regarding doing life together as spiritual family, Jesus modeled a lifestyle that was dynamic, it was multiplicative, and it was also movemental. Right. I'm two words there, movement.
You're going to explain those, right?
I'm going to explain all those. So what do I mean by that? Well, though there were times when Jesus was walking with his disciples and ministering to people, there were times of refreshment. There were times of fellowship, joyful relationships with one another. But Jesus, we know this from the scriptures, he set his face like flint to complete the work of his Father, to go head towards that cross. And along the way, what he did was he invested and he poured out into those 12, into those 72, into those 500 in different measures and different levels, of completing the work, that they would carry on the work of Jesus after he had died. Now, they weren't fully aware of the resurrection, though the Lord told them, until actually he showed up, in his resurrected form. But, the focus really for him was he was here to do his Father's work. And I think so often, Mike, if you want to go on this journey to even find or to create or to join a healthy extended spiritual family expression, well, there's a couple dynamics in that. And because we're studying the ways of Jesus, right? The words and works of Jesus, how he did things. Jesus was very dynamic. He was a shepherd, but he wasn't always sitting down all the time, kind of like teaching the word and doing this teaching, come and just, let's have coffee, let's hang out, let's go to the Father's presence. There's a time for that. That is part of the ministry of Jesus. And that is included in the scriptures. We see that. But he says, okay, we got to go across the Sea of Galilee. Let's get in the boat. Let's go. Or the crowds are coming. I got to run away and I got to go be with my Father. Or, the needs kept pulling at him. He kept withdrawing, right? Or the disciples will get up. Where is he? No one knew where he went, right? Or they're on the boat. He shows up walking on water. What? Very dynamic, right, Mike? And then he's multiplicative. And what he did was he commissioned his disciples in the Great Commission. At the end of the book of Matthew, in the beginning of the book of Acts, he says, go and make disciples. As Jesus was discipling, the disciples were also discipling. When Pentecost came, then they went from 500 to 5,000, like this, 4,000 overnight after Peter's sermon, and they kept adding to the numbers daily. So there's this thing of continuing of multiplication, of being movemental, which means the Lord, there was a time to go and there was a time to rest. There was a time to stay and there was a time to hide. So it was never the same thing all the time. Okay. And I think so often, Mike, a lot of our expressions in wineskins of faith and church, there's nothing wrong with staying and learning the word. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with going out and making disciples. There's nothing wrong with flowing with the Spirit where he's leading you to go on adventures together. There's nothing wrong with going to lead someone to Jesus Christ with a few friends on a team on an evangelistic mission. There's nothing wrong with that. But too much of the same thing or one or two things on a regular basis, we have to really examine some of the ways of Jesus where it was like, are we doing this because we're comfortable with it and we're just receiving all the time in those spaces? Or where are we being stretched in some other areas? Where are we not only receiving, but where are we entering into the place where it's more blessed to give than it is to receive? So there's a lot I just threw out there, Mike. What do you think?
Well, what you just described makes it sound like Jesus didn't allow anyone to get comfortable. I mean, they might have been felt safe around him, but they didn't feel comfortable. There was so much moving. I mean, he never healed anything the same way, right? It was like everything constantly was different. And so there's aspects of that where in our culture we get pretty comfortable with things. And I think part of what you're saying is we're really not meant to be comfortable in the sense of just staying the same all the time. That can get stagnant, where he's constantly wanting us to make disciples and move forward with things. Yeah, I just think that's what you're describing is something that a lot of people have a lot of fear for, because generally if we're comfortable, then we don't have to figure out or address the things that we fear. And like if we talk about a church that is multi-ethnic, multi-generational, multi-gifting, like there's going to be a lot of people that we're uncomfortable with that operate in things or look different than us, that is going to cause a lot of fear for people. That's something that it feels like you're going upstream then in something that God's wanting to bring about, but it feels like you're going against the grain of everything.
Well, because I can hear the objections when we say things sometimes. Something you said, like God doesn't want us to be comfortable. Let's unpack that like for maybe 30 seconds. I think God is the God of comfort. He's the one that can give us comfort in him, right?
Yep.
I think there could be rhythms of comfortability in seasons. I think there's rhythms of uncomfortability in seasons. And I think the goal is for us to enter his rest, right?
Yes.
More than comfort, it's entering to his rest, and to get to the promised land where you've got to fight the giants to overcome and then occupy the land. That takes work to do that. and almost like we have to labor to get to our rest. So here's what we're talking about of what Jesus encourages us, because he modeled this, right? He taught about honoring others ahead of himself. You know, even God with the Father Jesus did not consider himself equal to the Father. Okay. And just that spirit of humility, living a life of growing in maturity and character is what he taught us. He taught us to lead through serving by laying down one's life, to invest in others, to eventually turn loose the greatness of Jesus himself within them for his light to shine through them. So I just gave 3 examples right there, Mike, of is that comfortable? No. Does it bring comfort? Yes, because we're sowing. Right. Someone receiving that, do they feel comfort? You better believe it. Is it uncomfortable sometimes if you've never had that before? No question about it. So I think we just want you, if you're watching this or listening to this, what we're saying is I think it's dynamic. It's never going to look the same, and comfort for the sake of leading to, because here's the thing, when the Israelites got comfortable throughout the scriptures and prosperity, they got in trouble. Right. Yikes. Like the greatest moves of God was in a place of deep desperation when the chips were down against them, and they had to retool and refire up some muscles of faith and exercising things that was uncomfortable, I'm sure, but the victory was unbelievable, right? Like how comfortable is childbirth? Holy cow. So, but at the same time, the joy that comes after the delivery, the joy that comes in the morning from the night before of the trauma, of the suffering. So Mike, I just think, we want to speak against some of the things where some streams love comfort, they can over strengthen it. And some of our brothers and sisters in other streams that are about pioneering, moving, breaking, shaking, let's keep going, and resting is a real issue for people. Well, you know what? Comfort's okay for you. Comfort and rest are like something that maybe you need to lean into a little bit more. But I guess our point is, Mike, if you're going to go on this journey to build a healthy, extended spiritual family, just know you're going to go upstream, because because really, when Jesus says foxes have holes and birds have nests in the air, birds in the air have nests. If you're going to go for this, we sometimes find this, even what we're doing with the church that we're planting, right? It's like we're so misunderstood, and yet, but it makes sense. And we're probably not really going to look like what it normally is out there. And that's okay, because that makes sense to us, because we're building in this way. But at the same time, we're trying to follow what Jesus did. Not to saying churches aren't, but you can get sometimes into a rut of doing, this kind of boxed way of doing it. You box yourself in, you miss out on some of the grace. So Mike, as we're landing the plane, what do you think?
Well, the thing that came to mind as you were talking there was really the thought of independence versus interdependence. Yeah. Because the culture is so me-centered that it's we're thinking about ourselves so often in order for us to be seen or promoted or whatever the case is, but to be interconnected and prefer someone else before ourselves is so contrary to what we've learned in this culture. And it can draw a lot of fear of what would it look like, because we're so knowledge based on things in this country that, like, to actually have experience is really scary, because we've been hurt so often with people, and to actually find people that we can trust in this can sometimes be painful, because of it can be hard discussions or things that get triggered in us. But when you find it, and I think that's part of what we're trying to say in this, is like, we're trying to encourage, because it's been well worth any of the negative things that have happened along the path. What we've seen of family and community happen has been well worth any of that. And so it's just scary reaching out to get experiential in what we're talking about, versus just trying to learn about it, and to hop into the pool can be a hard thing.
I think that's a great ending. And even as we're coming up here on this recording in end of June, we're going to be celebrating in this country Independence Day, right? That's as right. Kingdom people, it's celebrating interdependence as a lifestyle. Not codependence, right. Not independence, but interdependence, because that is the way of the Trinity. That is the way of the Trinity relating to his people, and we relate to one another. That's uncomfortable, Mike. But here's the thing. We find comfort being interdependently connected to one another and depending upon his rest from that place of work. I know maybe some of that, maybe if you rewind the tape and listen to that again, it kind of made sense. But at the end of the day, Mike, if you're going to go for this, we want you to. And there's a lot of blessings. There is a lot of wholeness. There's a lot of healing. And there's a lot of toil. And there's a lot of heartbreak. And it's everything that Jesus walked through. And that's the kind of thing I want to be a part of, Mike. So love you, brother.
Yeah, love you too.